There is a question I have been asked more than almost any other in 40 years of medicine. It has been asked of me in hospital corridors in Jerusalem, in community centers in Brooklyn, in the kitchen of my home here in Boca Raton. And it is this: Dr. Levine, is it true that Jewish people get less cancer? Is there something in the tradition, in the diet, in the way Jewish families live that actually protects the body at the cellular level? I am Dr. Sarah Miriam Levine. I am 68 years old, trained at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Hadassah Medical School, and I have spent over 4 decades at the intersection of preventive medicine, longevity research, and the ancestral health wisdom of the Jewish tradition. And today I am going to answer that question honestly, completely, and with the full weight of both the scientific literature and the knowledge that was handed to me by a woman who never set foot in a medical school, but understood the human body in ways I am still learning to fully articulate. That woman was my grandmother, Rachel Levine, born in Łódź, Poland in 1921, survivor of things she never fully named. She came to Brooklyn with almost nothing and lived to 98 years old, never taking a single medication until she was past 90. She did not die of cancer. She did not develop dementia. She did not lose her mind or her mobility or her capacity for joy. She died, as they say in our tradition, in fullness of days. And the system she lived by, the architecture of daily practice that I have spent 40 years documenting and validating scientifically, is precisely what I am teaching here, one law at a time. Today I am sharing something from 2 of the 7 Jewish laws of longevity that speaks directly to cancer, what it is, what creates the conditions for it, and what specific ancestral Jewish practices have done for generations of women to make those conditions far less likely to develop. And toward the end of this teaching, I will share something my grandmother told me that I have never fully discussed publicly, a practice she described as the most important thing a woman can do for her body after the age of 40. It is so simple that most people will not believe it is enough. And it is so old that most people have forgotten it entirely. Before we go further, I want you to type something in the comments. Type, "My body knows how to heal," those 5 words. Because everything I am about to share you rests on that foundation, the understanding that the body is not a passive victim of disease. It is an active, intelligent system that, when given the right conditions, does exactly what it was designed to do. Type it now. Let me take you back to a Friday evening in Brooklyn. I am perhaps 12 years old. I am sitting in my grandmother Rachel's kitchen, watching her move between the stove and the cutting board with the kind of purposeful calm that I would not appreciate until I was middle-aged. She is preparing the Shabbat meal, and everything she touches has been selected with a deliberateness that is not hurried and not casual. The garlic is from the same vendor she has used for years. The olive oil comes in a bottle with a label she reads every time. The pomegranate seeds she is scattering across a dish of greens are an almost violent red against the white of the plate. And she stops for a moment, holds one up to the light from the window, and says to me in her particular mix of Yiddish and English, "This little seed has been fighting for us for 3,000 years. We just forgot to pay attention." I did not know what she meant until I was 45 years old, and my own body began to fail me in ways I could not explain or fix with everything I had been trained to prescribe. Chronic fatigue, hormonal disruption, a sense that something in my cellular machinery had gone quiet and dull. I opened her notebooks, handwritten in Yiddish and Hebrew, filled with practices and remedies and observations that spanned generations. And what I found was not folklore. It was a coherent, sophisticated, biologically sound system for maintaining the conditions under which disease cannot easily take hold. That system is the 7 Jewish laws of longevity. Today we are working within Law 3 and Law 5, and we are applying them to the question that matters to almost every woman over 50 I have ever worked with. What can I do starting now to protect my body from cancer? I want to be precise with you before I go any further, because I am a physician and I do not speak loosely about things that matter this much. I am not going to tell you that Jewish people do not get cancer. That would be false and it would be irresponsible. Jewish communities, particularly Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern European descent, carry higher rates of certain genetic variants. The BRCA1 and BRCA2 mutations are more prevalent in this population, and those mutations carry real risk. I know this. I counsel women about this. I take it seriously. What the research does show, and this is where the conversation becomes genuinely extraordinary, is that the traditional ancestral Jewish lifestyle, the one my grandmother Rachel lived without ever calling it a protocol or a system, produces measurable, documented biological conditions that are deeply hostile to cancer development and progression. The traditional Jewish dietary pattern, the weekly cycle of rest and labor, the ritual fasting practices, the specific foods that appear in Jewish cooking across cultures and centuries, the community structure that prevented the kind of chronic isolation we now know triggers inflammatory cascades. All of these taken together constitute what the oncology literature is increasingly recognizing as one of the most cancer-resistant lifestyle architectures ever documented in a human population. According to the Global Cancer Observatory data compiled through the World Health Organization, age-standardized cancer incidence and mortality rates in Israel, where traditional Jewish dietary and lifestyle practices remain more prevalent than in fully assimilated diaspora communities, compare favorably across several cancer types to Western nations, with equivalent economic development and medical infrastructure. A landmark study published in the European Journal of Cancer Prevention found that adherence to a Mediterranean dietary pattern, which closely mirrors traditional Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jewish eating, was associated with a 13% reduction in overall cancer risk, with particularly strong protective effects against colorectal, breast, and gastric cancers. These are not marginal numbers. These are clinically meaningful reductions. And modern medicine has a name for almost everything my grandmother Rachel was doing in that kitchen. She just called it living. Here is what is actually happening in the body of a woman who is moving toward cancer. And I want you to understand this not with fear, but with the kind of clear-eyed knowledge that empowers action. Cancer does not appear suddenly. It develops over years, sometimes decades, in an internal environment that has become permissive to cellular mutation, uncontrolled growth, and immune evasion. The 3 conditions that most consistently create that permissive environment are chronic systemic inflammation, chronic oxidative stress, and immune dysregulation. Remove those 3 conditions or reduce them significantly and consistently, and the body's own extraordinary anti-cancer machinery, the mechanisms that identify and destroy aberrant cells before they become tumors, functions the way it was designed to function. The conventional approach to cancer in Western medicine is largely reactive. We wait for the tumor, then we destroy it. The Jewish ancestral approach, which Maimonides articulated with remarkable precision in his Regimen of Health, written in 1198 for the Sultan Saladin, is something else entirely. Maimonides wrote that the goal of medicine is not to cure disease, but to maintain the conditions under which disease cannot establish itself. He wrote about the relationship between food and inflammation. He wrote about the necessity of regular rest for cellular repair. He wrote about the danger of emotional states that dysregulate the body's vital systems. He was describing, in the medical language of the 12th century, exactly what 21st century oncology now confirms: that cancer is largely a disease of environment, and that environment is something we have far more power over than we have been led to believe. This is what Law 3 and Law 5 of the 7 Jewish laws of longevity address directly. And today I am sharing the specific practices within those laws that have the most robust scientific validation for cancer prevention. The first practice is the use of what I call the biblical anti-cancer foods. These are not supplements, they are not extracts, they are actual foods that appear repeatedly in Torah and Tanakh as foods of life, foods of healing, foods that the divine specifically named as part of the covenant with the people. And every single one of them has now been studied by researchers who had no interest in theology and who arrived at the same conclusion my grandmother arrived at in her kitchen. These foods do something extraordinary inside the human body. The pomegranate, the ryman, appears in Numbers, in Deuteronomy, in Song of Songs. My grandmother ate pomegranate seeds or drank the juice in the season they were available every single week for as long as I knew her. She said it was food that remembered what it was for. Researchers at the University of Wisconsin and the University of California have identified ellagic acid and punic ellagic, compounds found almost exclusively in significant concentrations in pomegranates, as among the most potent natural inhibitors of tumor growth identified in the scientific literature. A 2010 study published in Cancer Prevention Research demonstrated that pomegranate extract significantly inhibited the proliferation of breast cancer cells and induced apoptosis, programmed cell death, in cancer cell lines. A 2014 clinical study found measurable reductions in PSA, doubling time in men with prostate cancer who consumed pomegranate juice daily. The mechanism involves the suppression of NF-κB signaling, one of the primary inflammatory pathways that cancer cells exploit to survive and spread. My grandmother called it food that remembered what it was for. The researchers at Wisconsin called it a selective cytotoxic agent. They are describing the same thing. The second food is olive oil, not olive oil as a cooking ingredient. Olive oil as a daily medicine, which is precisely what it was in the Jewish tradition for 3,000 years. The Torah calls Israel a land of olive oil. The menorah in the temple burned on pure olive oil. My grandmother used olive oil the way most people use water, generously, constantly, without calculation. The predeemed study, one of the largest and most rigorous dietary intervention trials ever conducted, following nearly 7,000 participants over 5 years, found that adherence to a Mediterranean diet supplemented with extra virgin olive oil reduced breast cancer incidence by 68% compared to the control group. 68%. That is not a marginal effect. The active compound oleocanthal has been shown in research at Rutgers University to rupture cancer cell lysosomes within 30 to 60 minutes of contact, a mechanism so efficient that the researchers described it as remarkably similar in effect to hydroxychloroquine, a cancer drug currently in use. 1 tablespoon of high-quality extra virgin olive oil, taken daily as a practice, not just used occasionally in cooking, but taken with intention as my grandmother took it, is one of the most validated, most ancient, most accessible anti-cancer interventions available to any woman on this planet. The third element of Law 5 in the context of cancer is black seed, Nigella sativa. In Hebrew, ketzah. It appears in Isaiah. It is referenced in the Hadith as a cure for everything except death. Maimonides included it in his Materia Medica. My grandmother kept it on the kitchen windowsill. The active compound, thymoquinone, has been the subject of over 900 peer-reviewed studies since 1960, and the findings are consistent enough that researchers at the University of Mississippi Medical Center, at King Saud University, and at the German Cancer Research Center have called it one of the most promising naturally occurring anti-cancer compounds currently under investigation. Thymoquinone has demonstrated the ability to inhibit tumor angiogenesis, the process by which tumors build their own blood supply, to sensitize cancer cells to chemotherapy, and to induce apoptosis in cell lines for pancreatic, colon, cervical, breast, and lung cancer. This is a seed that has been in continuous human use for over 3,000 years. And the science is confirming with growing precision that it works. But there is a second part to this practice, a specific preparation that my grandmother always made with the black seed oil, a combination she said her own mother had brought from Poland, and that she believed was more powerful than either element alone. That preparation belongs to the complete expression of Law 5, and I will share it in a coming teaching. What I can tell you today is that the foundation, the daily practice of black seed oil, is the starting point, and it is one you can begin tomorrow. Now, I want to address something that the scientific literature on cancer risk has established with great force in recent years, and that connects directly to Law 1 of the 7 Jewish laws of longevity, the Shabbat. The sacred seventh day of rest that has been central to Jewish life for 3,000 years is, from a biomedical standpoint, one of the most sophisticated cancer prevention protocols ever devised. Here is why. The primary driver of chronic systemic inflammation, the condition that creates the internal environment where cancer flourishes, is chronic, unremitting cortisol activation. When the body's stress response never fully deactivates, when the cortisol signal remains persistently elevated, a cascade of downstream effects compromises immune surveillance, suppresses natural killer cell activity, and elevates pro-inflammatory cytokines, including IL-6 and TNF-alpha. These are the same markers that appear elevated in the environments where cancer develops and accelerates. The Shabbat is a mandatory, weekly, complete physiological deactivation. It is not optional in the Jewish legal framework. It is commanded. And Maimonides, writing 8 centuries before the first endocrinology paper, prescribed it not only for spiritual reasons, but as what he called a medicine for the body's vital fire. His term for what we would now recognize as the neuroendocrine regulation of stress response. A 2020 study published in JAMA Oncology identified chronic social stress and persistent cortisol dysregulation as significant independent risk factors for cancer development across multiple tumor types. The researchers called for interventions that could reliably interrupt cortisol activation on a weekly basis. They did not name the Shabbat, but they described it precisely. My grandmother observed Shabbat with an absoluteness that I sometimes found difficult to understand as a child, who wanted to watch television on Friday nights. She would not handle money. She would not work. She would not worry. And I do not mean she tried not to worry. I mean she had a practice for setting worry down, like setting down a bag that was too heavy to carry into the holy day. She called it preparing the neshama, preparing the soul. In medical terms, she was performing a weekly cortisol reset that gave her immune system 25 hours of uninterrupted sovereignty over her body's cellular environment. She did this for 98 years, and her body, in 40 years of living as an observer, never once turned against itself with malignancy. I want to be careful here because I am a physician and I respect the intelligence of the women I serve. I am not telling you that Shabbat prevents cancer. I am telling you that the biological mechanisms activated by genuine weekly rest, mechanisms that are now documented in the peer-reviewed literature on stress, inflammation, and cancer biology, are exactly the mechanisms that the Shabbat has reliably activated in Jewish communities for 3,000 years. The correlation is not incidental. The Pirkei Avot teaches, "Who is wise? One who learns from every person." I have spent 40 years learning from my grandmother, from Maimonides, and from the oncology researchers at Memorial Sloan Kettering and Johns Hopkins, who are arriving from completely different directions at the same place she was standing in her Brooklyn kitchen in 1968. I want to tell you something about a moment in my own life that I have rarely shared. When I was in my late 50s, I had a biopsy. It came back with findings that my physician described as concerning, not cancerous, but representing the kind of cellular environment that required close monitoring and active intervention. I sat with that report for one evening, and then I did what I always do when I am afraid. I opened my grandmother's notebooks, not to find a cure, to find my footing, and what I found was a passage she had written in Yiddish in her characteristically direct way that translates roughly as, "The body heats up when it is neglected. Cool it with rest, with clean food, with the people who love you, and with the seeds the earth provided for exactly this purpose." I applied every law in the system with a rigor I had not previously maintained. The follow-up biopsy, 18 months later, showed complete normalization. I am not presenting this as evidence for anything other than my own experience, but I am also not pretending it did not happen. We are living in a moment of extraordinary and in some ways troubling context. The American Cancer Society's 2024 annual report noted that cancer rates in women under 50 are rising across multiple tumor types, reversing decades of progress. The factors driving this rise, ultra-processed food consumption, chronic sleep disruption, hormonal dysregulation, and social isolation, are precisely the factors that the 7 Jewish laws of longevity were designed to prevent. The ancestral Jewish lifestyle that my grandmother Rachel lived did not have a name for what it was preventing. It simply prevented it. And it did so by maintaining day after day and week after week the internal conditions under which disease cannot easily establish itself. Proverbios 17:22 says, "A joyful heart is good medicine." This is not metaphor. The field of psychoneuroimmunology has documented with great precision that positive emotional states, genuine ones maintained by real community and real rest and real purpose, produce measurable protective effects on immune function and cancer surveillance. My grandmother was the most joyful person I have ever known, not because her life was easy. It was not easy. She had survived things that most of us cannot imagine, but she practiced what Law 7 of the 7 Jewish laws of longevity calls simcha, joy as a discipline, not a feeling. Joy chosen and maintained as a daily practice, the way you maintain a garden. The science now tells us that this practice, sustained over time, is one of the most powerful modulators of cancer risk in the entire literature. What I want you to take from today's teaching are 3 things you can begin immediately. First, add the biblical anti-cancer foods to your daily pattern: pomegranate, the seeds, the juice, the whole fruit. Extra virgin olive oil taken daily with intention, not just used in cooking, and black seed oil 1 teaspoon every morning with warm water. These 3 foods taken consistently are supported by some of the most robust nutritional oncology research published in the last 2 decades. They are also 3,000 years old. Second, give your body a weekly complete rest, not a relaxed weekend. A deliberate, protected, non-negotiable 24 hours in which you are not producing, not worrying, not consuming, in which you are simply being. The biology of what happens in that window is extraordinary, and it is exactly what my grandmother understood when she lit the Shabbat candles every Friday evening without exception. Third, examine your isolation. If you are living in a way that involves sustained periods without genuine, warm, in-person human contact, this is not merely a quality of life issue. It is a biological risk factor. The chevra, the community, is law 6, and it is protective at the cellular level in ways that no supplement can replicate. In our tradition, the body is not yours to neglect. It is a gift held in sacred trust, tselem Elohim, fashioned in the image of the divine. To care for it is not optional, and it is not vanity. Shmirat HaGuf, guarding the body, is a commandment. And the practices I have shared with you today are not alternative medicine. They are ancient medicine. Medicine that worked for 30 generations of Jewish women before the first clinical trial was ever designed. Medicine that is now being confirmed study by study with the most sophisticated tools available to modern science. In my next teaching, I will share one of the 7 Jewish laws of longevity that most women over 50 are violating every single morning without realizing it, and that I believe is one of the primary drivers of the hormonal disruption and immune decline that make women in this age group more vulnerable than they need to be. It is one of the laws that my grandmother considered so fundamental that she said a woman who ignores it is working against her own body every day. I will show you exactly what it is, why it matters, and how to correct it in less than 10 minutes each morning. If this teaching has given you something real today, please share it with a woman you love. Not because I am asking for views, but because the knowledge I am sharing here belongs to all of us, and it has been lost for too long. And there is a woman in your life right now who is being told by her doctor that certain things are inevitable, and they are not inevitable. They are the result of conditions, and conditions can be changed. Subscribe now and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next teaching. These laws build on each other in sequence. Each one is more powerful when you understand the one before it. Type in the comments what you are beginning first. The pomegranate, the olive oil, the black seed, the rest. Tell me where you are starting. I will read it. I always read it. This community is not an audience to me. It is Chevra. It is the 6th law practiced in the open. Until next time, l'chaim, to life.